Let's see if we can do this. Now, nearly there. Yeah, I think. Oh gee, they came in for a very rapid landing there as well. No worries at all. It's a common occurrence here, actually, where the music sort of crash lands, sort of comes in for a nice gliding finish there. But that's all part of the process here. So welcome to everybody here on Radio Maria Ireland. Thanks for tuning in and being part of the radio here as well. Thanks to everybody watching on Facebook and YouTube Live. Good to have your company, and thanks again for praying with us, for promoting and encouraging others to listen in, and indeed to all our dear benefactors and friends for whom we pray and remember many times each and every day, because without you, this wonderful gift of the radio just simply could not begin. Our Mariathon is coming up just the week after next. It'll be the Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, the week, not next week, the week after. So it'll be the 12, 13, 14. And it's just a lovely moment every year. If it's a first for you, you haven't come across it before. The Mariathon is a play, obviously, on the name of Our Lady Maria, Radio Maria. And Mariathon, the idea that it's a kind of, not a race as such, but a marathon is a long distance to a sort of effort, endurance to a noble prize at the end. So it's a nice sort of idea. And what every Radio Maria station is called to do, is asked to do, is to have its own celebration of the blessings and gift and joy of the radio, the gift it is to so many each year, to renew, I suppose, a little bit a sense of our spirit and our mission, but most specifically to focus on those new radios that are beginning, the mission of the Church as reflected through the charism of Radio Maria. And as I was mentioning earlier, there's about 85 radio stations, and the Chinese broadcasting station, which is based in Italy, and broadcasting on the internet, of course, to the Chinese people in Mandarin. Cantonese is the other Chinese language, and that's spoken in southern China, and Canton, Hong Kong, that's sort of is it Kowloon, those parts of southern China there. But Mandarin would be more or less the national tongue, if you like, spoken everywhere. Probably different dialects, the Mongolian end of things too. Vast nation and a vast people, and how many have yet to hear of Jesus Christ. There was some articles some time ago that Christianity was one of the fastest growing religions in China these days. See, they've been so deprived and so closed in with communism. There still are, of course, still are. And missionaries have long since been evicted from China and haven't been let back in. I've edited a book there on a Columban missionary, Aidan McGrath, Father Aidan McGrath, extraordinary man, born in Dublin here. He spent 2.5 years in a prison cell in China before they evicted him from 50 to 52. And he was expelled in the end, and not after excuse me, not until after he had been tortured really and suffered solitary confinement. And a most extraordinary story. It was just a joy editing his material. When I was working on Frank Duff's cause for canonization here in Dublin for 3 years with the Legion of Mary, we came across a couple of folders in the archives there. One had China written on it, I think another Father Aidan McGrath on it. And when he had been released from prison in the 50s, sometime after, he'd actually written up his prison diary notes, or notes from his time in prison, a bit like Cardinal Pell. I haven't read that. It's a book now I'd like to get hold of and read maybe at some point. The Cardinal Pell's story of his time in prison at much shorter time and not quite the same circumstances. But here, Father Aidan had gone to China in 1929 as a newly ordained priest from the Columbans in Navan. The Maynooth mission to China had only just begun, really, in 1916 with Bishop Ned Galvin was the priest, a Cork priest from a cohort in Maynooth. John Blowick was the other great founder of the Columban Missions Missionary Society, and they had gone just animated by the extraordinary zeal of just the outpouring of missionary activity from Ireland, based, I suppose, on the mission in the Dark Ages as well. You know that Ireland had spread to the ends of Europe, the ends of the world, in its own way back in those days. But this was a new wave of missionary output from Ireland in the late 19th, early 20th century. So Father Eamonn, with two of his brothers, Ronan was another brother, can't think the third brother's name, but they all became Columbans, and one of his brothers was in Taiwan, and the third brother became part of the administration of the Maynooth mission to China, the Columbans, in the early days, and he stayed at home. But Father Eamonn, it tells his story and how he came to China in 1929, and the hardship, simply having to learn the language, living in quite primitive and difficult circumstances and conditions. He wrote at length about the great flood. The Yangtze River flooded its banks on an occasion. Thanks, Brendan. And it just decimated Hanyang and Wuhan, I think, around that area where the virus is said to have come from. Wuhan and Hanyang are all that central province where the Yangtze, I think, where the three rivers meet, and that's where the new massive dam has been built, the Three Gorges Dam there. The Yangtze, what are the other two? I don't know, I'd have to look them up. A spectacular feat of civil engineering nowadays, but an awful lot of flooding accompanied that construction. Such is the nature of the Chinese. You know, they go big with these things. Anyways, that was the territory that Father Eamonn and those early Columbans ministered in and travelled around, and just did really heroic work. And it's a lovely story as it unfolds, because Father Eamonn, you know, as a new priest and a new missionary, really a little beleaguered, having to learn the language and figure things out. He described, you know, the primitive conditions. One of the places he stayed in was I think a grain factory of some kind, an old shed of a thing, and he described the rats as, you know, running over you at night time, you know. That it was that kind of a place, and he said you got used to it. I can't imagine how you get used to that. But he said of the Chinese people that they were lovely people, you know, very family oriented and very welcoming and just beautiful people to work with, and that the Catholic faith seemed so suited to their culture in many ways, like the maternity of Our Lady, you know, the Holy Family, and just the values and the kind of honor that they hold, you know, the person in that sort of Oriental culture. So he became quite proficient at the language, but he found in the early days it was just impossible to make much in the way of progress and headway, and he tried a little bit of Catholic action, as it was called. So he got a group of lay people together, and he said it was a disaster, because the lay people just took command of things and took control and ended up alienating others. And there was one Christmas night, I think, everything kind of fell apart, and there was just real division in the community afterwards, and things just didn't go well. So anything to do with lay apostolic action, he scrapped. He said, look, I'm not going near it. I'll do the best I can as a missionary, and it'll be what it'll be, and let the Lord do the rest. So one fateful night in the 1930s, there was another priest, I'm working on memory now here, Father Hogan. He really would have been the priest who would have been given the title of the founder of the Legion of Mary in China, not so much Father Eamonn. And he had started a presidium or two in another part of the mission, in and around Hanyang and Wuhan, those areas, the territory where they were. And he had kind of got great success with it. So Bishop Ned Galvin brought some handbooks back from Ireland, handbooks of the Legion of Mary, and took Eamonn aside. He tells this story himself. Actually, a reminder to self, because I have some of his audio talks actually in digital form. I should actually play them back for you, because he's a terrific speaker. He came to the seminary. I was in the seminary in the 90s, and we invited him twice to come out to Maynooth, and he spoke. It was quite a moment. He spoke in Maynooth in the parish church on the second occasion, and in the college campus on the first. And It was just funny. I remember at the time Amnesty International came on board, as the students came on board with us to advertise the talk, because he was, a former victim of persecution in the communist country, and it was just funny having all the Amnesty students there who were sort of on the liberal end of things, I suppose, a bit, listening to this priest talking about true devotion to Mary. We just found it quite amusing. And all the seminarians there. It was a great moment. A fabulous speaker, wonderful man. So I should get him to tell his own story, really. At any rate, just to carry on Father Eamonn, he was very reticent to try the Legion of Mary. Like, I've done that, tried lay apostolic work, nah. So he started at night time, a bit like Nicodemus, coming to the Lord at night time. And he assigned them some pretty difficult tasks to do, because the Legion's like that. You meet, you pray, and you have work to do, and you report back the next week, and you meet, you pray, and you have more work to do, and you report on your work. And just little bits of apostolic activity, trying to evangelize. And he did it quietly and at night time, and just was so afraid starting it out. But eventually he found that they took to it like ducks to water. It suited them, and again, their culture so well. And they became very proficient, and they were bringing souls to him for formation and for baptism and for, the sacraments in ways that he couldn't possibly have done. Just the ordinary lay people reaching out to their friends and family and neighbours and so on. And it just took off. So much so that in 1939, when the Japanese just overran China and they occupied his parish, he was thrown out because he was a foreign missionary. They just didn't want them around. He went back to the mission headquarters, which maybe at that time was in Shanghai. I know they had a missionary headquarters there too. It's where he ended up, certainly once communism had taken over. But he found that they were absent from their parish as long as the Japanese were there. It was several years, I think. And by the time the Japanese had moved on, and they had done awful damage, the history is pretty shocking, what the Japanese inflicted upon the Chinese. So he was expecting his parish work was just going to be decimated. But as it turns out, he arrived back, and this little group, this band of members of the Legion of Mary he had established, had kept things going. They had kept the prayer going, the sacramental life by way of baptism. They had kept the formation and catechetical instruction going, and everything was running fine without him. And he was so impressed that he set himself then to energize himself to help promote the Legion. The story as it unfolds is quite interesting too. I might keep going. Now that I've started, I might just as well keep going with it. That the war took its toll then, the Second World War, on through the 40s. China wasn't as directly involved. The Japanese were sort of drawn into it, and I suppose they withdrew from China then to meet with the Americans and the Allies counterattacking. So on Japan and all these other after Pearl Harbor and all of that. So here was the missionaries in China during those war years, and carrying on their work. And in the end, after the war, 1947, I think, if I'm not mistaken, 46, 47, Father Eamonn got permission after 15, 16 years, 17 years on the mission to go home for a break. So he went home for, 6 months or something. Came to Dublin, his home place, and first thing he does is goes to meet Frank Duff, sits down with him, tells him all about the work of the Legion on his mission, and Frank really animates him. Of course, in the meantime, Frank had been writing to him at length with quite a number of letters between Frank Duff and Father Eamonn McGrath. And it's just the zeal of these two men in growing and building the Legion, especially among the university students in Shanghai and places like that where they had higher education. And again, the Chinese young people really took to it so very much. So he brought back again a renewed zeal, having experienced the Legion firsthand in Dublin, and went back to China, and then was commissioned by the new papal nuncio, who was Archbishop Antonio Riberi, who himself had been secretary to the papal nuncio here in Dublin once the nunciature opened in Dublin in 1929. He was one of the early secretaries, and Frank Duff was great pals with the nuncios, of course, and his connection with Rome too, because Frank in 1931 had gone to Rome to meet Pope Pius XI. So there's fascinating layers of history in all of this. All these people of old that you hear of, well, Frank was sort of intertwined with all of this. So he had made friends with the secretary, who was Monsignor Riberi. And then Monsignor Riberi was promoted, of course, and made papal nuncio to West Africa. Now, West Africa then, very interesting, a great legionary called Michael Ecking, again, possibility for canonization, certainly his story has been told, did marvellous work getting the legion going in West Africa, as indeed did Bishop Joseph Shanahan, who was a founder of the Holy Ghost, or not, I won't say a founder, an Irish, I suppose, founder maybe. Those two French priests were the founders of the Spiritans long before. But Bishop Shanahan was a leading light and a great promoter of the Legion of Mary in West Africa. And between them, Archbishop Riberi had heard of the mighty work of Edel Quinn. Now, Edel was in Africa from 1936 to 1944, and so right through the war years again, and with lay people, had done marvellous work in Nairobi in Kenya, and in Madagascar, she journeyed over there, and in South America too, or South Africa rather too. She'd done marvellous work and achieved things with the ordinary lay people that missionaries were struggling to get. So come 1948, Archbishop Riberi was then reassigned from West Africa to China as the internuncio to China. And in his mighty work and his zeal, saw and realized that communism was now beginning to take a hold. Chiang Kai-shek was the what's the right word now? He was against. He was opposing a kind of a nationalist party, I think, if I'm right in understanding that, opposing the Communist Party, and there was quite a lot of conflict going on. But the communists were simply overrunning China, pretty much from north to south, and in the late 1940s. So Archbishop Riberi took Father Aidan aside, among other things, no doubt, and said, look, whatever you do, get the Legion of Mary going anywhere you can, all over China, so that we can put up at least some resistance to the communist takeover, and that the native people at least will have some faith that they can hold fast to in the meantime. And as I say, the young people took to it like ducks to water. Father Aidan had fluent Chinese at this stage and travelled the length and breadth of China, and was even flying over the communists, from airport to airport to continue his until eventually he was confined to Shanghai and then arrested around the year 49-50. Excuse me, and put in prison. And he tells of his prison story then in great detail. So it's a fascinating book of his own writings. I mean, I only just, with Michael Walsh, another legionary, we sat together and just put together his diary, Father Aidan's diary, his prison account, and then some of the letters back and forth between himself and Frank Duff, and compiled it and made it into a story form to allow his story to be told. He had actually written a kind of a memoir that he had intended to have published and never got published. And if you ever come across any of those great books of that era telling the stories of communist China and persecution there, the Red Lacquered Gate is another fascinating account. I think that might be a Columban one too. What's the other one that comes to mind? Many Waters, that's a Chinese victim of communism and persecution, tells her story. There's quite a few of them. They are fascinating. Myers is a more recent one. What's that book called? Came out in the 90s. A kind of an overview of all of these studies. It's just extraordinary what the Church and the Catholics endured in China, still enduring really. So his time in prison was a fascinating moment too, and he was ill-treated badly, but certainly had the hand of Our Lady with him. And one lovely story he tells, and I've told it here on the radio before, how he used to wear his brown scapular. And in those days, the brown scapular wasn't just a small little piece of cloth on string either side that you wear over your neck. It was quite a big, I'm holding up a square here for the camera, a big cloth square on either side. You couldn't miss it. And what Father Aidan McGrath endured as part of his treatment after he was arrested was that they strip searched him for 3 weeks on end every day, and just to humiliate him and to maltreat him. And he said for whatever reason he couldn't figure out, they'd never noticed that he was wearing a scapular. And it was a big clunky, piece of cloth. And after 3 weeks, he said, where'd you get this? What's this? And they took it from him. He kind of shrugged his shoulders. I mean, what could he say to them? Because in theory, because it had sort of strings attached to it, you know, he could have done himself some self-harm. So that was, they tried to take all belts and all things away from you. I think they do that in prison even today. So they didn't spot it. So he took that as a very signal indication from Our Lady that he was being watched over and protected and looked after. And in the end, he was delivered from prison on the 28th of April, around this time, on this day, type of thing, as Bishop Fonzie shares with us, and told his story in the National Boxing Stadium to a crowd of about 5,000 who turned up. And we actually have that recording that's there. So we'll listen through them again and see if we can share them with you. Of course, this is the centenary of the Legion coming up, so a signal moment to do it. So definite reminder to self to do that for you, because he is such a great speaker and it's fascinating. So at his return home to Ireland, there's pictures of him, and he wasted away, the poor man. But Frank Duff meeting him at the airport. And all of the Irish dignitaries were there. The Taoiseach, Eamonn de Valera was head of the opposition at the time. Who's the Taoiseach? Costello, John Costello, wasn't it? The Papal Nuncio, the Archbishop, you know, all the dignitaries that could have come came to hear him speak. And a crowd of 5,000 was just a huge turnout. And he told his story, most fascinating account. Anyway, let me keep that for another day. Let me pause the story there. Sorry if I didn't intend to kind of come in and monopolize the Chatechesis with that, but it's such a great story and maybe a timely one for us today. You know, we think of persecution, we think of opposition to the faith, we think of the courageous witness that's demanded and maybe demanded of us too, you see. And that things in a way are not all so different. We probably have it a lot easier in some respects. But these stories really do energize us, they do encourage us in the work of the mission. And he was asked, Father Aidan was asked, you know, how did he survive? Because the torture there was terrible, the solitary confinement. A tiny cell, he was a small man, but he said he couldn't lie down in the cell, it was just so small. And they wouldn't let you rest, you weren't allowed to cough, to sneeze during the daytime, you couldn't nod off during the daytime. They'd beat you up if they caught you napping. And he was, you know, and he said they went mad all around him. You know, he'd hear the screaming of the other prisoners. It was terrible, dreadful. And he said what kept him sane and at peace was his faith and his trust in Our Lady. True devotion to Mary was his huge selling point ever after, because he was about 45 years of age when he was released from prison, and his talk in the boxing stadium in 1952, it was July 52, not long after he'd been released. The last words of his talk, I remember, he said, "May this my second life be as fruitful for my Queen." It's a lovely line. He was 45 years of age, I think, at that time, so that his second life might be as fruitful. And the truth is, he did. He got a second life. He lived till he was 90. He died in the year 2000. I think he was 95 or 6, I think, when he died. He got another. And he was fit and healthy. And like I say, he died in 2000, so it's only a few years after he came to Maynooth to speak with us. So he was in, you know, around the 90 mark when he came to us in Maynooth. And on fire, even still then. The zeal of the man. He ended up doing a lot of work for the Columbians in the US, in the UK, actually in England, during the post-war years. There was a lot of ministry to the Irish who had emigrated en masse, really, in the 1950s and 60s to the UK, and very active in chaplaincy work there. And he ended up in the Philippines doing a lot of wonderful work with the Legion there too. Most extraordinary man. And that's another book, actually, that needs to be written, because the book that we did, myself and Michael, edited, it finishes after his return home from his imprisonment in China. Anyway, bit on the long-winded side there. It's a great story. I love it. It's a really powerful testimony and very current in its own way, very relevant and pertinent to our own time. And just, you might say, curious that Wuhan was his field of endeavor. Wuhan and Hanyang, and ended up in Shanghai, was imprisoned from Shanghai. Ward Road was the name of the prison. Awful place. Excuse me. He really suffered, you know, and he doesn't go into all the detail in the testimony he gives. Now let me pause there, if I may. Let me pause and invite you. Please do participate. If that sort of brings to mind anything for you, again, or anything connected, you may have heard something else on the radio. You want to engage in the conversation here, please get in touch. You know all the numbers, I'm sure many of you do, and how easy it is here on Facebook just to drop a like and a share and whatever, a comment as well. Anytime, please do, even if you're listening back, as I say. But again, the text number 089 467 2000. 089 467 2000. Put a +353 in front of that too if you'd like to just get in touch with us from the north or from outside of Ireland. The landline, give a call there, 014 123 456 and +353 14 123 456. Email info@radiomaria.ie and write to us here at St. Anthony's Business Park, Ballymount Road, Dublin 22. We do love to hear from you. Now, a dedication today, piece of music. It's going to be the Lord's Prayer in Aramaic, sung by Harpa Dei. Now, Harpa Dei are just a beautiful, I think they're religious, or they're certainly dedicated to the Lord, gentlemen and three ladies. And they just compose and they just sing such really beautiful, inspiring music. And this is going out as a birthday request. Aideen was in touch. Let me see if I can find it here. Yes. So for my friend, Aideen says, Kira, it's her birthday today, Friday the 30th. So may the dear Lord bless you. May he bless you and keep you. May the dear Lord bless you. So she's suggesting a catchy song. Well, catchy, this is catchy in a different sense of not a foot tapping one, but catch the soul, catch the spirit and touch you there. So, I don't know if Aideen was, no, I think I sent a text to Aideen earlier on to her note it would be around this time. So I do hope you're listening in. Thanks, Aideen, for getting in touch. So, Kira, a very happy birthday to you. And we'll be back very shortly after this beautiful piece of music. Now, clear the throat time. Headphones here, you might be able to hear some of this.
Ten seconds, Father.
Welcome back. A lovely piece of music, Harpa Dei there in Aramaic, the Our Father. So that's a happy birthday there to Kira today. Thanks, Aideen, for getting in touch with us. And thanks indeed to everyone who's watching in and tuning in and part of the radio here today. Lovely to have you with us, and thanks for getting in touch with us too as well. So great to have your company again. 089 467 2000 is the text and WhatsApp number. Thanks, Christine and Anne, sending in greetings via the Facebook page too. Very good. Just looking in there today, St. Pius V, just so we're kind of turning some pages back in history. He was a Dominican pope, and the year 1572 is when he died, on this, around about this time. And he had a task on hand. Again, I like to emphasize that, and it's good to kind of keep it before us, that every era has its own troubles, has its own burdens, its own struggles, and it's no different. And I don't think it's all that healthy to romanticize the past, or it was in our parents' day it was this and this, or when I was a child it was this and this. Maybe, but each period has its own troubles. So poor St. Pius V, he had the task of implementing the Council of Trent. Now the church was torn apart by the Reformation and the Protestant really revolt. It would be more accurate to protest as it was a revolution rather than a reformation. The reform was what the church needed. Revolt was what those who left the church did, in fact. Far more accurate word to use. And of course the Reformation had to begin somewhere, the reform of the church, that is, within the Council of Trent, and all of the teachings that came forth from that, as the Catechism and so many other things. A lot of good certainly came from that. And of course we were hearing yesterday a little bit about the Papal States and all the aggro going on between nations. And not just that, the threat of Turkish invasion. The Muslims were starting to invade from the east, taking over the Holy Land at the time of the Crusades. And the Crusades spanned many centuries, in fact, to try to reclaim what rightly belonged to them. And this is an interesting bone of contention even today, try to reclaim some of what, like the Hagia Sophia, isn't it, the great, I think the Muslims have shut that down or closed in on it. It used to be open, I think, to Christians in some way, that famous basilica, and there's a lovely image of Our Lady in that, what was a wonderful cathedral. And I think is it a museum or a mosque, certainly at this stage, in Turkey. Again, I should research these things a little bit more before bringing them up. At any rate, these are one of the issues that Pope Pius V had to face. The invasions of the Muslims. How are you going to, on the one hand, the Muslims attacking, and then the other, the Protestant revolt going on, and other nations then becoming laws unto themselves. Henry VIII, and the bishops abandoning their role and their authority and succumbing to Henry VIII, except for St. John Fisher and Fisher and Moore, isn't it? Yeah, St. John Moore. And that's just the UK. That's just England, At any rate, he sought with prayer and fasting and holding fast to his Dominican rule and denying himself many of the customary papal luxuries at the time, sought to try to bring the church back on track again. He encountered vehement opposition from England's Queen Elizabeth and the Roman Emperor Maximilian II. Problems in France and in the Netherlands also hindered Pope Pius V's hopes for a Europe united against the Turks, the Muslims. Only at the last minute was he able to organize a fleet which won a decisive victory in the Gulf of Lepanto off of Greece. That's the famous story, the Rosary there, Our Lady of the Rosary, that feast day, October the 7th, 1571. So things were not looking good in terms of holding off the invasion from the east into Italy. If that had happened, who knows? We might be Muslim today ourselves, I don't know. But anyway, it was a victorious parry against them. The wind had changed direction and their fleet was kind of upscuttled, and Our Lady's intercession was certainly attributed because they only had a weak defense against them. So the poor saintly Pope had all that to contend with. So again, if you think you have problems, think again and say, look, Lord, just help me with the problems I have. Let me deal with these as best I can. Today's the anniversary too of St. Faustina, her canonization, the 20th anniversary of her canonization, because as we know, Pope St. John Paul II was the one who inaugurated the Feast of Divine Mercy. And her book, of course, the diary, which we share with you, and we have the Divine Mercy Hour here every day, except a Friday, of course, today, because it's the Stations of the Cross, always on Friday in Catholic Heritage Association. So it was the year 2000, she was canonized in St. Peter's Square, and it says here that she described the event with details more than 60 years earlier in her diary. I looked that up, 1044 to 1048, those paragraphs. Whoever participated in these events knows that her vision was fulfilled accurately. On that day, the Holy Father, St. John Paul II, introduced the Feast of Divine Mercy for the whole Church and provided it with the message of mercy as articulated by St. Faustina for the third millennium of our faith. If ever there was a time, an era for mercy, surely our time is it. You can find out more of the testimony of Marcus' healing, which was tested for the canonization, is there to be looked up as well. There's a website here that's given for me. We give daily thanks for this gift of our time, as St. Faustina and the message of mercy which she provided us with were called by St. John Paul II, a gift for our time. Millions of people around the world join in her prophetic mission of proclaiming the biblical truth about the merciful love of God. Because you could boil the full Christian message perhaps down just to that one word. Mercy, or two words, divine mercy, really. And as we heard in the Gospel today, do not let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God still and trust in me. That's the message. If you have a Divine Mercy image, one to have to hand, we have one here in the studio with 3 or 4 of them actually around the building. Jesus, I trust in you. These are Jesus' own words to us. Trust in me. There are many rooms in my Father's house. So you could distill the entire gospel, scriptural message, the entire message of Christ, perhaps, itself, just to divine mercy. He's come that we might know his mercy and share in his divinity, who humbled himself to share in our humanity, to teach us what mercy means in his person. No greater love, no greater mercy than to lay down your life for your friend. So marvelous. So the new congregation that the Lord asked her to begin the apostolic movement of the Divine Mercy, MIC, isn't it? They're the missionaries of mercy there in the States. Very strong, powerful mission they have too. Lovely to see it, certainly for our time. And you know how it is, again, turning back some of the pages of history, the Lord raises up great saints. I mentioned this yesterday too, the likes of St. John Paul II, St. Faustina, Padre Pio, Mother Teresa. But for every era has its great and wonderful saints. So we had the rise of the monastic communities in the Middle Ages, St. Dominic and St. Francis of Assisi. No different from our own times, you might say too. The Jesuits, then later on after certainly the time of the Reformation, Pius V and onwards, the 1700s, St. Ignatius and these great figures, St. Charles Borromeo. Mentioned about the Columbians here in Ireland, with their own rise of tremendous outpouring of grace, and many of these founders should be canonized. What's our problem here that we can't canonize these people? Add Frank Duff to that list, because Frank Duff, he's my man. In 1989 he was born. The Legion started in 1921. The early years of the last century, just colossal outpouring of grace and faith and mission. So each generation, each era, each time gets its marvelous figures. And St. Faustina certainly, for our time, in the face of the Second World War, and then everything that's happened since, way too much drama going on. And surely the biggest battle for souls today, the secular humanism and liberalism, the destruction of the family. There's a long litany of terrible woes that afflict us today, of injustice to the poor, when the world we've advanced so far, and yet we haven't advanced at all. What great needs there are, material needs in the world. And like I was mentioning, Mother Teresa, Saint Teresa of Calcutta, like how poor we are if it is that we destroy our unborn life, unborn babies, unborn children, citizens. This is, to me, certainly the most lamentable of all afflictions. We're far poorer nowadays. It's not as if it's something altogether new, but it just seems to be so prevalent and just accepted in a kind of callous way at times. So is there work to be done? And do we need massive saints today? People of just courage, conviction in their faith, and willing to get stuck in. And I don't mean, with the fists clenched and the shield up and the sword hand in and all. That's not, again, I've been at pains to try to emphasize that our weapon is the rosary, our weapon is prayer, our weapon is the sacraments and a sacramental life. And thanks be to God, our churches are reopening in on Monday week to limited numbers, but that you can be nourished with the Holy Eucharist. And you've heard it on Radio Maria, I encourage you wholeheartedly to flood back into your churches, pack them out to the capacity, let there be queues waiting outside. We just so earnestly need a return to our faith with zeal and energy and courage. There's great work to be done. There are colossal challenges for our day, but we have the likes of Father Aidan McGrath, Saint Faustina, Saint Pius V, Frank Duff, the Edel Quinn, the litany of just these heroic men and women, lay people, and religious and priests. This is our heritage. This is the extraordinary thing we've been blessed with, those who have just heroically held fast to the faith and dealt with the problems of their day with courage and conviction and even with joy, and offer the world something different, something new, something that will transform and have won hearts and transform minds too. It's our turn. This is our time. My time is gone as it flies here on Radio Maria. So thank you for your company today. I'll chat with you again tomorrow. Roisin will join me, please God, for Chatechesis tomorrow morning at the same time. So thanks indeed for being with me. Thanks to Jacqueline and to Catherine, looking after the mixing desk there and just learning the ropes there too. So do please get in touch afterwards if you're listening back or watching back. I always would like to hear from you. So sorry for the slight overrun here. We'll allow our bells to introduce now our Regina Celli and our midday prayer.